When an outbreak occurs, sometimes when an outbreak occurs, sometimes we don't even know what is causing it. But through genomics, we can understand at the molecular level what the potential organism could be. And so once we have some material from, let's say, some patient in the outbreak, we can extract the nucleic acid of everything, including the human being himself. And by analyzing it using these sequencing instruments, we are able to know what organism could be causing it. It could even be a completely new organism which is not known to infect humans, like what happened with the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic.
I think let's get started. Well, good morning, good afternoon, evening to all of you, wherever you have joined us from. We are certainly very excited that you could be a part of what I think can be regarded as a landmark event that is really celebrating the success of what we could refer to as a Pan-African strategy to strengthen and support both the scale-up of sequencing, but also the introduction of pathogen sequencing capability within a few countries where that has not been there in the past. We are certainly glad that you could be with us. Maybe just some logistics before we start. I would direct you to the bottom of your Zoom screen. There is an interpretation button. And if you were to click on there, you'd see that we have a couple of options available to you. You could select an English, French, Portuguese, Spanish, or Arabic translation. And I'm sure that you will enjoy what we have planned for the next 3 sessions. So about the 3 sessions, let me just remind you that the way that we have planned this event is that we'll have our session 1, which will be about to start now, with a couple of opening remarks from the leadership at the Africa CDC, from the WHO Afro, as well as ASLM. And so maybe without further ado, as I see more people busy joining, it is certainly with great excitement that I welcome you to this event, where we are really celebrating the landmark event of at least 120,000 SARS-CoV-2 genomes that have been sequencing within the continent, and really exploring what that means for us as a continent and beyond. And so I'm going to call on 4 speakers to give the opening remarks, and I will and I will introduce them as they come up. And so let us get started then. And let me just say that it is certainly a pleasure for me to welcome the Acting Director of the Africa CDC, Dr. Ahmed. And I'm going to call on you, sir, to switch on your camera and unmute your mic, and we will have your remarks at the outset. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Alan. And a very good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever it is all the participants are joining us from. I am very happy and honored, indeed privileged, to be here today to welcome all of you to this very, very important event where we are celebrating as a continent a very important milestone on sequencing and sharing of the first 100,000 genomes of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Although this was done during the pandemic, indeed it is because it was done during the pandemic that we are so proud that we did it at a time that things were very difficult, and yet we still did it. Many people did not think we would be able to reach this particular milestone, but it is with pride and a lot of humility that we as Africa CDC, including the whole network, are very proud and honored to be sharing this particular milestone here today. I would also like to thank you, participants, for taking time out of your very hectic schedules, I'm sure, to join us here today to help us to celebrate this success. Indeed, during this meeting, we are going to also identify the lessons that we've learned, the challenges that we faced, and then we figure out how that can be able to improve on the way that we plan for any future outbreak, epidemic, or a pandemic. As Africa CDC, we have been at the forefront of responding to this pandemic. And by the way, in the middle of this pandemic, we were responding to all other outbreaks that happened on the continent as well. And there are dozens of those that we have addressed during this pandemic. But for the COVID-19 pandemic, we are very honored to have been at the forefront of the response. Indeed, at the same time, we were seeking to strengthen the health systems on the continent so that they are ready for any other outbreak or epidemic or pandemic that may be able to come into the future. You will recall that as Africa CDC and the Africa Union, we have advocated for the new public health order. And as part of this new public health order, we are strengthening the capacity and capability of public health institutions and national reference laboratories to improve the speed of detection, testing, and sequencing capacity on the continent. We are strengthening our public health systems in Africa, and therefore our role as Africa CDC in doing this is a huge priority for us on the continent of Africa. While we are incorporating emerging innovative surveillance tools like pathogen genomics into our public health system, it is also important to note that this is being done in the context of improving the health security of the whole of Africa. We want it to be timely to detect, we want it to be timely to respond, and we want it to be able to deal with those pathogens that we know and those that are emerging and re-emerging here on the continent. We also want to ensure that the system that we are building can be able to address diseases that are endemic to this continent. Africa CDC launched the Institute of Pathogen Genomics in November of 2019, and a flagship initiative of this institute is the Africa Pathogen Genomics Initiative, which was then launched in October of 2020, about 1 year later. Since the launch of this initiative, the Africa Pathogen Genomics Initiative, we have done a few things which we would like to share with you today, and we're very proud of this. One is we have the operationalization and coordination of a continental pathogen genomics network. And this was done in the middle of the pandemic, a very huge effort from our colleagues here at Africa CDC, our partners across the continent and across the world. Indeed, a very big kudos to the national level laboratories that stepped up to be part of this pathogen genomics network. Secondly, we have referred more than 33,000 samples for sequencing. During the lockdown, this involved driving up to 9,000 kilometers sometimes to move samples from one country to the other. It was not a mean effort. It was a huge effort that we had to undergo in the middle of the pandemic. Third is we recognize that this has been one of the largest ever distribution of sequencing equipment, reagents, and supplies across the continent. In fact, I suspect that it has been the only such type of heavy distribution in any part of the world. And this was done on a continent like Africa, where communication sometimes is a challenge, and it was done in the middle of the pandemic. We have also trained more than 230 candidates in samples packaging, sequencing, and data analysis. This as well was done in a hybrid way. Some we did physically, some we did virtually. So again, it's a very big milestone for us. We are also supporting regional centers of excellence with more than $8 million worth of grants to support personnel, to support supplies and other needs that these laboratories may be able to require. So these are just some of the things that we've done during this period, which form a very key milestone in what we are celebrating today. As we celebrate the milestone of 100,000 genomes from 53 of our 55 African Union member states, it represents a 20-fold increase in the past year and a half, meaning that a lot has been happening in our laboratories across the continent. During this pandemic, our African researchers have led the global genomic surveillance effort with the discovery of variants of concern, and they have also showed resilience and consistency in supporting our continental effort. So a very big round of applause to our researchers across the continent for the good work that they have done. While we celebrate the milestone, I hope that this conference will also outline the major challenges, the lessons that we've learned, and the way forward to keep the momentum running, indeed to expand routine sequencing for the current pandemic, as well as all other pathogens of public health importance to us here in Africa. And as I conclude, ladies and gentlemen, delegates, I would like to thank the Ministries of Health, the national public health institutions, national reference laboratories across all our member states for their continued support and commitment to strengthening disease surveillance in Africa. We are also very grateful to our regional centers of excellence for their commitment to providing technical support and sequencing service for those countries that do not have in-country sequencing capacity. Finally, we thank the Africa Pathogen Genomics Initiative partners for trusting us, having confidence in us to be able to drive this initiative, and their continued commitment and support to all other work that we do at Africa CDC. I would like to urge all of you to continue your support to further strengthen and expand genomic surveillance on the continent, and I also wish to assure you of the strong commitment from Africa CDC to creating the synergy required to maximize the impact of our interventions to prevent, detect, and respond to future disease threats on the continent. I wish you a very good meeting, and I thank you for the opportunity to share with you some thoughts from us here at Africa CDC. Back to you, moderator.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed. And for those who have just joined us, we are having our opening session where we are receiving 4 opening remarks. Just to remind you that we are live streaming on both Twitter as well as YouTube, and you have a Q&A box where you can certainly pose questions for the next 2 sessions. And I'm going to call on Dr. Etienne Koa, who is the Emergency Health Information Management and Risk Assessment Program Area Manager for the World Health Organization Africa Office. Sir, we welcome you and we look forward to hearing your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and welcome to everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, depending on where you are. It is a real pleasure to take part in this event. Again, my name is Etienne Kua, Program Area Manager for WHO Afro for Emergency Health Information and Risk Assessment. On behalf of the Regional Director for Emergency Preparedness and Response, I would like to welcome you to this virtual conference marking the sequencing and sharing of 100,000 SARS-CoV-2 genome by Africa this month of June 2022. This is a key milestone, as Professor Umar mentioned, for pathogen genomics in Africa. WHO commends the strong collaboration and partnership with Africa CDC, a collaboration that has resulted in this great achievement. We also recognize the important partnerships with other organizations and institutions. The COVID-19 pandemic underscores the need for strengthening genomic sequencing, strengthening surveillance and epidemic intelligence capacities for Africa. We focus on early warning and detection capacities. Today, we are excited about the 100,000 SARS-CoV-2 genomes. At the same time, we know that despite the progress, much remains to be done. This virtual conference, with participation of experts from the continent and partners, is a great opportunity for exchange and for continuing to support this effort on the continent. Genomic surveillance, as I mentioned before, is at a key moment with growing global attention on pathogen genomic surveillance. In 2020, WHO, in partnership with Africa CDC, established a sequencing laboratory network for COVID-19 and other emerging pathogens to bolster genomic sequencing efforts in the region. Since then, and Professor Umar referred to it, 12 specialized and regional reference laboratories have been set up to provide sequencing, data analysis, and other technical support for countries in the region. Laboratories are operational in at least 8 countries: South Africa, DRC, Nigeria, Senegal, Ghana, Kenya, Morocco, and Uganda. Moreover, since the start of COVID-19 pandemic, the Emergency Preparedness and Response Cluster at WHO Afro has accelerated its work on genomic surveillance, piloting a successful project to build capacity in Southern Africa with the launch of a regional center of excellence for genomic surveillance and bioinformatics in Cape Town. The new center has helped scale up sequencing and bioinformatics on the continent for COVID-19 and other diseases. As an example, in the first 6 months of that project, WHO provided about 4.5 million as well as technical support that helped dramatically scale up sequencing, reaching 5,000 samples every month, more than 5 times what it was before the first half of 2021. WHO is also supporting countries by providing funding, laboratory supplies, consumables, training, and additional human resources when needed, while simultaneously encouraging governments to build national capacity. This project is a success and is now being extended to West Africa and Eastern and Central Africa. Finally, I would like to point to WHO's 3 flagship projects, which are collectively aiming to improve the capacity of countries in the Africa region to prepare, detect, and respond to public health emergencies. In particular, the TAS, which is Transforming Africa Surveillance System project, is a driving force for genomic surveillance. As we explore ways to improve and scale up genomic surveillance, we should note some of the current challenges and priorities around training, around human resources, bioinformatics capacity, laboratory equipment, reagents, data sharing, and monitoring and evaluation. Once again, I would like to acknowledge and appraise the collaboration with Africa CDC and our partners and urge to continue such integrated approach. I would like to thank Africa CDC, Africa Pathogen Genomics Initiatives, and all the organizers of this event for this great opportunity. On behalf of the Regional Director for Emergency Preparedness and Response at WHO, I wish you all a very productive workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kowa. It is certainly a pleasure for me now to actually ask Ms. Maseri Keto, who is the Director of Programs at the African Society for Laboratory Medicine, to give her remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We are more than pleased to participate in this milestone event, celebrating 100,000 SARS-CoV-2 genomes sequenced in Africa. The African Society for Laboratory Medicine has, for the past 11 years, been spearheading advancements in laboratory science in Africa by Africans. We were honored to join the Africa CDC in the implementation of next-generation sequencing across the continent. One of the things that Africa has done right since the beginning of the pandemic was to adopt a regional collaborative approach to optimize COVID diagnostics and surveillance. Instead of countries acting individually, the African member states worked together and pooled resources to boost one another's capacity. With the Africa Pathogen Genomic Initiative, the approach was the same. We pooled the resources and identified 11+ sites across the continent to act as regional centers of excellence. We worked together to procure equipment and supplies, to improve the infrastructure of the sites, and are supporting advanced training, establishment of sample referral systems, and implementing quality management systems. Another lesson learned was that when resources are available, Africa has the learning agility and willingness to conduct advanced science. The 100,000 genomes sequenced to date are proof of this. Finally, all of this could not have been achieved so quickly and effectively without partnerships. We thank our funders and our technical partners for their support and confidence. As the old African proverb goes, to go quickly, go alone, to go far, go together. In this particular case, we went far and quickly together. We look forward to the next 100,000 genome sequence, to supporting national capacity in addition to regional capacity, and to advancing genomics in other critical disease areas. The best is yet to come for Africa as we continue to collaborate, share resources, and expand partnerships towards excellence in science. Thank you very much and enjoy the conference.
Thank you very much, Siri. And certainly it's a pleasure for me to now actually call on Dr. Henry Kuberde, who is the head of Division of Laboratory Systems and Networks at the Africa CDC. And it is also within his division that the Institute for Pathogen Genomics runs. And so, sir, I now hand over the mic to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Allen. Let me start by recognizing the previous speakers and also, distinguished panelists, all participants. As you know, despite the important role of pathogen genomics in disease surveillance and outbreak response, it has not been widely implemented in the African continent due to a number of reasons, as you know. Especially cost of sequencing equipment and reagent, infrastructural limitations, lack of skilled human resource, and generally lack of attention to the field were important factors. However, COVID changed this situation where the demand for sequencing increased significantly. So the Africa CDC work on pathogen genomics dates back to 2018, 2019, when we started with the situational analysis of the continent in terms of capability. And we also conducted a big consultative meeting at African Union here to understand really what the major challenges were. And then the outcome of the assessment and the consultative meeting was used to formulate the Pathogen Genomics Initiative, which the acting director alluded that it was launched in 2020. So let me take this opportunity and thank really a special role of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for working with Africa CDC from the very beginning and formulating this initiative. And of course, later, other important partners joined the initiative, USCDC, and especially the role of manufacturing companies. Their generous support allowed us to really support this initiative. And ASLM has been an implementing partner, a strategic partner with Africa CDC. And we were fortunate to get the support from our specialized centers, some of who are really the panelists in this session, and also sequencing laboratories and reference labs across the continent. Of course, there are many actors, WHO, the the West African Health Organization, and many other partners like Rockefeller Foundation were very much supportive of this initiative. So because of this support, as you heard, today we are celebrating an important milestone for the continent, sharing more than 100,000 sequences. This may seem a small number compared to the other parts of the world, but it's an important achievement for Africa if we see where we were. So this is really an important event that we need to celebrate. And I think all of you here, you deserve a special recognition for this milestone. This event is organized to celebrate this and to learn, to reflect, what were the challenges, learn lessons, and also chart, the next steps. So the next milestone for the African continent and for all of us here will be really, can we sustain the gains that we have made so far and apply pathogen genomics routinely to disease surveillance for other priority diseases in addition to COVID-19? I think that will be an important question that we need to address here as experts, as teams, and as leaders. So to do that, I think we need to embark on important strategies globally, continental level, and also at national level. So we need to engage globally important actors to do a cost reduction so that pathogen genomics will be democratized. And then we need to advocate simplification of the technology so that sequencing can be possible with minimal laboratory infrastructure and training requirements. And we also need to address some regulatory and policy bottlenecks. And it's also important to focus on establishing core genomic sequencing facility instead of focusing on silo disease-specific sequencing programs to gain cost efficiency. And also, we need to promote a networking approach so that countries share public health assets, because we know all countries are not at the same level. And then, it is important also, to engage member states so that we can have a pathogen genomics strategy in each member state as part of their national health plan to address, sustainability long term. And finally, we need to do more in terms of utilization of pathogen genomics data at Ministry of Health so that we are adding value to the disease control program. So this event today, the virtual meeting, will address some of this. I'm really excited to see a very strong lineup of panels. We look forward really to listen to the panelists in some of these areas that I mentioned in additional program areas. So we look forward for a very interactive session, and we are really ready to take further any of the recommendations that are coming out from this session. So once again, welcome to this important session. I thank you for the opportunity. Back to you, Professor Alan.
Thank you very much. And what you've now heard from are four remarks from our various leadership structures. And we are going to transition into the scientific panel session. And I just want to remind those that have joined us that if you look at the bottom of your Zoom window, there is an interpretation button, and once you click on that, you will see options for a range of language translations. To the left of that interpretation button is a Q&A box, and feel free to post questions within that box, and we will monitor that throughout the following 2 sessions. As we transition into the next session, we've got about 3 minutes, and so what I'm going to propose is that we take a 3-minute pause, allow you to get a drink, a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, as you come and sit down for the next session, where we will have some of the leading genomics experts on the African continent engage in a conversation as we reflect on the progress made during this pandemic, and particularly during the last 12 months. And so we will resume 3 minutes from now, and I would then call on the panel members to switch on their cameras, and we will then get started. See you in about 3 minutes.
When an outbreak occurs, sometimes we don't even know what is causing it. But through genomics, we can understand at the molecular level what the potential organism could be. And so once we have some material from, let's say, some patients in the outbreak, we can extract the nucleic acid of everything, including the human being himself. And by analyzing it using these sequencing instruments, we are able to know what organism could be causing it. It could even be a completely new organism which is not known to infect humans, like what happened with the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic.
Right. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you very much, Hamado. It is so exciting for me to welcome a panel of leading genomics experts on the continent. And we have an hour, 10 minutes, which is not a lot of time. And so we certainly want to hear from our panelists. You also, as the audience, have an opportunity to pose your question in the Q&A box. Bear in mind that this session is also live streamed on both Twitter as well as on YouTube. And I think it's interesting that our previous opening remarks made a recurring comment around strengthening our public health emergency response. And we've also heard about this 20-fold increase in genomes that have been generated within the continent. And I'm going to just introduce my 6 speakers, and we've got a big number of speakers, so I'm not going to get all their CVs, but just as I have the names on my list here in no specific order, I'm going to give you their name and their affiliation, and we are really going to ask of them by way of introduction, if they could maybe reflect on what would they, or what would you regard as a key factor that has driven the success of this expansion of sequencing capability within the continent. And that will be our starting point from which we will then work. And with me on the panel, I have Professor Anne van Godberg, and she is the laboratory lead at the National Institute for Communicable Diseases in South Africa. We've got Professor Dorothy Yeboah Manu, who is the director of the Noguchi Memorial Institute for Medical Research in Ghana. We have Professor Isabella Ochola, who is the head of biosciences at the Kemri Wellcome Trust Research Program in Kenya. We have Dr. Hamado Sal, who is the CEO of the Institute Pasteur de Dakar in Senegal. And then we've got Professor Tulio de Oliveira, who is the head of the Center for Epidemic Response and Innovation at Stellenbosch University, as well as the KZN Research Innovation and Sequencing Platform, also called CRISP in South Africa. And then finally, we have Professor Christian Happy, who is the director of the African Center of Excellence for Genomics and Infectious Diseases, also called ACEGID, and that is at the Redeemers University in Nigeria. Myself, my name is Alan Christoffels. I am the head of the South African National Bioinformatics Institute, based at the University of the Western Cape. So to my guests, welcome. We're very excited to have you here, and certainly collectively, if you look at the number of people, we're close under 600, really sharing in what has to be a landmark event on the continent as we drive not only genomics, but the capability of the continent to respond to disease threats. And so I'm going to go in the order in which I have mentioned your names and asked, maybe as an opening remark for the next 3 or 4 minutes, could you maybe speak to what you see within your reflection as a key event that has driven the success of this mammoth sequencing effort? And so we're going to start with Professor Anne.
Thanks for the introduction, Alan, and thank you, everyone, and welcome to all the participants. I have to say I'm very proud to be here, and what I believe is the success is exactly this, the collaboration, the working together of Africa CDC with AFRO, with public health laboratories, and with research groups. And I think the pandemic brought out the best in us. It made us volunteer It made us work so hard together to find solutions. I think we were driven to make things happen. And that collaboration, that willingness to make things happen, to move to places that we didn't even believe were possible, I think that is part of the success of what we're celebrating today. And I'm hoping that everything we've learned and everything we've done will teach us how to move forward. There's so much good in all the things that we did together. And really, to emphasize again, we did it together. It was all the countries, all my colleagues who I emailed, worked with throughout this time. And I'm very proud to be part of this African initiative that is truly Pan-African. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anne. And I'm going to move over to Dorothy. Hi, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Alan, and all the organizers for the opportunity to be here as one of the panelists. I think in addition to the collaborative effort that was spoken, I think one of the things that I would like to share is driven to this success is thinking forward and leadership. Because before the pandemic, Africa CDC had already designated some of these institutions. They've already provided us with the funding to start organizing ourselves for genomic surveillance. So I think it's forward thinking because even before the pandemic, Africa CDC has taught the need for this genomic surveillance, and institutions like within West Africa, Noguchi, and Institute in Senegal, they've already put the necessary plans together. Then I also talk about leadership because even for Noguchi, for example, before even this pandemic, the university saw the need to build this capacity. So they've already acquired for us as a MySic and other things. So all these preparations were made it easy for us to sort of kick our sequencing activity forward. And I also like to also acknowledge the role played by WAHU within our sub-region, West Africa Health Organization, in terms of providing us the opportunity to train others and also organizing the whole sub-region in terms of other activities. And so I think that one, in addition to collaborative effort, I think forward thinking, tenacity of purpose and leadership, I think was very, very key in this drive. And I say well done to all the leaders who sort of supported us to get this done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. And I'm going to hand over the mic now to Isabel.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you very much to Africa CDC for putting this together. And I'm really appreciative of being part of this celebration of this great milestone for African science, where collectively across the continent, the labs have come together to do genome sequencing, and we've shown a capability, and they've been committed towards tracking the virus. So I think the first thing really is around commitments, the commitment of all of us, as my previous colleagues have just mentioned, in coming together to respond to a pandemic that we owned. In addition, I think one of the key factors is just essentially the capacity that was already available. And I think Professor Yobo already spoke to this. People with the capacity were willing to step up and avail their resources, avail their infrastructure and their personnel expertise to respond to the pandemic. I'd also like to echo the comments around the collaborative approach. And at this point, I'd also just like to highlight the collaborative approach we had to have, not only with national public health labs, but with the governments. And so the governments coming in and then owning the process, at points leading it and also supporting it. So ensuring that in that way, they had a great understanding of the need for real-time data so that they could respond to the pandemic. So then they began to support genomic surveillance and to allow researchers to work with the National Public Health Lab and provide them with policy briefs so that they could use scientific evidence to support their decisions around how they were going to respond to the pandemic. They also gained a better understanding because of this interaction of the need to understand not only variants circulating, in each nation, but in the region and across the continent. So I believe this improved level of understanding allowed for this rapid expansion also of sample collection points and expanding those networks that were linked to the sequencing reference labs. I think my final point really is around for the teams who were really working on the ground and the dedicated teams who were working on the ground, becoming familiar with the sequencing and bioinformatic protocols and the pipelines. And this was coupled with the expansion of the sequencing and bioinformatic capacity. So thank you once again to the Africa CDC, as Professor Yeboah said, taking on the leadership, allowing support for these laboratories to procure equipment, to procure reagents, so that we had a seamless flow of genetic data flowing out of those laboratories and supporting the laboratory networks that were providing samples. I think my final pitch is really just a huge thank you to all the dedicated teams across Africa who are using their expertise to demonstrate the genomes can be sequenced in Africa to respond to our own pressing challenges. So I think it's just really exciting for us as a continent, what we've been able to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isabella. I am going to now hand over the mic to Ahmed Assal.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alan. And I just want to start by really echoing all these congratulations to all this team. This may be like a small step for the continent, but it's a giant one if you look at the global health security and at the global level, if you see the impact that this may happen. So congratulations to all the people and organizations that made that happen. Coming to your question, I think I would say that there is a couple of different factors to me that seems absolutely critical. And I would call them first, collective intelligence. Second, I would call that the infrastructure of trust that has been built. Third would be really talent, because capacity building on all these young minds that are not in this panel, but that make amazing work. And I think the last thing, which is really the foundation for me, which is the strong surveillance system at the national level. Let's face it, when we talk about genomic surveillance, we are taking the information that come from all of the different parts of Africa, sampled by people, mostly anonymous, providing the information that allow us to interpret later in terms of age, sex, groups, disease, and things. And that's really where the value of the sequencing comes. And I think that is, for me, one of the good things that help this to grow, and that is an investment we should keep doing in terms of sustainability for the future of genomic surveillance. Let's make surveillance systems strong to provide information that can be used to exploit actually what we get out of this pathogen sequence. When I mention collective intelligence, I'm referring to all these amazing partnerships led obviously by Africa CDC, WHO, and partners like GZ, partner like the different network we're dealing with, the manufacturer. All these people came together. The funders that are critically important, was we talking about Gates or others, Rockefeller. It's for me, all this intelligence together from the point that we're gonna find, we're gonna provide equipment, we're gonna build together some collective protocol that make the huge difference, and that put us in a place now which is much better than before this COVID. That's how institute like ours could gain new sequencing machine, reagent for free, and how right now 17 different African countries through a system that been put together in a very hierarchical way with regional centers and actually global centers in a way that would make happen this possibility. So collective intelligence for me has been important in terms of partnership and putting together our brain. The third thing is the talent. When I say talent, actually what impressed me the most, because we've done a couple of training sessions with different countries, was like, you have very young, bright people and that are very good when we are talking about dry lab or wet lab. And these are really the future of this continent and the future of what we are doing. And I think this has been a key factor, because these are the ones that would do this test and make sure that they analyze well and interact among themselves in a very good network and build a good bond that make this quite successful. And the last thing I wanted to mention is this infrastructure of trust, meaning that today, if we look at the 17 different countries, they're all sending without much thinking in terms of IP, in terms of ownership of the data, because we all together build that trust where people send the information, send the samples, and get in return some results. So when I mentioned these four main factors, we have to really use them and leverage them to build actually the future and the sustainability. Several of you have mentioned and deal with some challenge like logistics or reagent provided. So I'll stop there, Alan, and would be happy to take any other question.
Thank you very much, Nabru. I'm going to hand over to Tulio.
Hello, good day to everyone. Thank you, Alan, and thank you, the Africa CDC, to invite me. Yeah, so my reflections, before I quick say what we did there, it's more how we did. I think this is, for me, was 10 times more important than what we did there, 100,000 genomes. Yeah, so my team, we have led the network for genomic surveillance South Africa, and then very quick, we approach like hundreds and hundreds of African scientists and say, why we do not analyze data together? And what we did was like week after week, like we count over 70 weeks, every single week we met. Every single week we share data. Every single week we share the scripts, we teach each other. And that for me was really, really important. How we managed to really come together. And what we did, we end up really starting to lead the world in genomic surveillance. Yeah, many people may not be aware, but Africa has detected the variant of concerns of SARS-CoV-2 much quicker than any other continent. And we are talking about the beta, we are talking about the eta, we talk about the Omicron. And not only detect much quicker, but we act much quicker. And many times we were punished, we are discriminated, but this made us even more passionate to do that together. What we also did, we set up like, so we just, as a collective, we have 300 authors that with a paper that's reviewing science at the moment, and we count in reality 49 of the 55 countries in Africa generate sequencing data. And from that, we also count like 12 different labs that support each other. For example, our lab did sequencing for 21 African countries. But what we did, what we told them, we don't want to just receive your samples. After you send samples, send your people, and we're going to teach them how to do that in the sample. And that we made so many friends in the process. Yeah. What also Africa did, we started this pandemic with over 200 days, 150 days of average turnaround time between samples and genomes. Yeah. In the most recent months, we are talking about less than 20 days. So now we can move samples with this great network set up by the WHO, Afro, and the Africa CDC. We can sequence, we can give them back to countries within weeks. Really fast turnaround time. Yeah. And what we also did that many people may not be aware, and some fantastic collective work, we also developed our own genomics methods. Our team will partner with Illumina to first validate the NextEra Flex, which now is the base of the COVID-seq. Yeah. Some fantastic work in Uganda at UVRI. Yeah. Keep generating primers that work for our variants and distribute around the continent. And that for me was the really important thing, how we did that and how we did together and how we are much better prepared for the next epidemics and pandemics. Yeah, thank you, Alan. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Over to you, Christian.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Alan, and then thank you to Africa CDC for organizing this. And again, I want to use this opportunity to thank all my colleagues and panelists for all the work that we've all done during this pandemic. And I think this 100,000 genomes could only be achieved, due to the what I call the visionary leadership of both the Africa CDC and then the WHO Afro. I think if they didn't think about setting up a network right up front or ahead of this pandemic, I'm not sure we would have been where we are today. And really, we also need to give a lot of credit, to the National Public Health Institute in Africa and the Ministers of Health for all of the hard work bringing all of these, everybody together, bringing the samples together that we could sequence and gathering the data together. I think it is a lot of credit to all of those people in the field. But I think I want to say that, this pandemic has demonstrated one thing, and it is that every time this continent has been challenged and given the resources, we have risen to the occasion. And we have come together as a people and worked
And I saw this, through this pandemic, what I call science without border in Africa, sequencing without border in Africa. Imagine, my laboratory in Nigeria receiving samples from Somalia to the extreme, using this information to respond to this outbreak, to this epidemic. People will be surprised, elsewhere in mainstream media, you hear that, we don't have enough cases, there's not a lot of information. We didn't have that number of cases in Africa. We didn't have that number of patients dying. We use the data that we generated to respond to this outbreak efficiently. Data, and as was often said by the former director of the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, Dr. Chikwe, that, the response in Nigeria and many other African countries were driven by evidence and scientific evidence. And people need to understand that. And I think really what I also saw here during this pandemic was something that was incredible. You can imagine in the midst of a pandemic, this continent was building the capacity, training African countries, training scientists from African countries to respond to this outbreak using genomic sequence information. Within this pandemic, while Amadou was training 17 countries, I was training 32 countries. Tulio was training almost the same number. You can imagine the level of confidence that got into it, and then and not surprising, you will see the number of genome, increasing 20x within a year. So this is the Africa we want to see going forward. This is the Africa we want to see, so we want to sustain this effort. But then I want to say, pandemic, as Tulio mentioned and others mentioned, we demonstrated we have the capacity and we have the talent. The first genome on this continent was sequenced within 48 hours of receiving the sample. That, I believe, gave the confidence to people on this continent that we could do it. And then eventually we took it and then we did it. And really, I really just want to say that, we should continue this way. We should continue to break these barriers and break the silos and then move and then demonstrate that we can do more. And I'm sure together, we definitely can do more. And together we can actually do good science. And together we can make, we can actually be ahead of the curve, if we really come together and harness our resources and then move it together. I want to conclude by thanking, those manufacturers, I don't want to list them, but I really, and also the funders, I can do but listing, Illumina and the ONT and then the Rockefeller Foundation and the Elmer Foundation, all of these people that really put in a lot of resources, to make this happen. And through the support to Africa CDC and ASLM. Thank you. And then I think put together we'll do better next time.
So thanks very much for that. And I think what actually resonates repeatedly is the commitment and the collaboration across borders. But something else that have come up is the building up of infrastructure that can underpin the kind of work which we are all doing. And I think this ties in with a question that has come up in the Q&A. But maybe as a preamble to that, we are aware over the last 12 months that there's been in excess of $30 million worth of sequencing equipment and reagents that has been deployed on the African continent. And the question coming up in the Q&A, and I'm sure also to people that might be listening to the streaming online, is that the key challenges that we have on the continent as people who are practicing genomics is really the lack or the limited reagents and materials. And then with all this equipment that we have, how do we maintain this particular equipment? And I'm going to ask you, you can raise your hand as panelists, in how you would like to respond to these two components to the questions. How do we deal with the lack of reagents, and how do we deal with this wonderful equipment that has been invested in the continent, but these have to be maintained over time? And so as you gather your thoughts on this, just to tell the audience again that I have a 6-panel member of, and I didn't mention this at the beginning, but really key groups that have supported the regional sequencing hubs within the continent as a way of having some sample referral within the network. So if you are new to the activities of the Pathogen Genomics Initiative, you probably need to know that within the structure of referencing laboratories, we have put in place a mechanism by which countries could refer biospecimens to sequencing hubs. And you see on my panel here the representatives of these hubs. In addition to that, we have carefully also selected a group that is a member of a national reference laboratory. And I think that is a key point, and I hope that we can come back to that with time permitting. And looking at the hands that have gone up, and I see your one has gone up. Do you want to start us off with a response?
Yes, just to start, I think a really important point in reagents and equipment is diversification. We need to insist that the manufacturers, the producers, our service providers give us in Africa a good service, a timelier service, and what we need. And I think there needs to be the competition, and we need to make sure that we have different platforms, different machines, and force the providers to give us a good service. And I think one practical and pragmatic suggestion is, and we try and do that, is to also then within our groups to share. When there's a shortage, when there's something that needs to be sent to someone else, I think very much to be very pragmatic, to try and help, especially when there's an urgent need in one country, an outbreak or something happening, is then to send reagents if there is no ability for that country to procure. But we need to force that these procurement issues, maintenance issues, do not stay in Africa. Over.
Can I maybe then just push a bit further in terms of regional responses, and maybe my colleagues in both West and East Africa, do you have some practical examples of how either this is being successfully implemented within your region, or maybe the fact that we cannot actually achieve that? Looking to Isabella and Amadou.
Thank you, Alan. I think I was just going to agree really with Anne around diversification being key, and trying to really push it back to the manufacturers who make these reagents. Firstly, thinking around Africa as a market source. I guess it appeared that we are a small share of that market, but I think this platform has already proved that once we get going, we really get going, and we're able to produce genomes. So we need to be considered as contributing to that market share. Secondly, I think those companies need to have offices in Africa. We can't go through third-party companies who are still learning how sequencing is done, and then they're supporting laboratories such as ours represented on this panel. That delays the services that we get. That delays equipment as well that we get. So if they had offices, whether it's a regional office in Kenya to serve East Africa, and something in West Africa and something southern, but it has to be located in Africa so that they can have reagents on the continent, and then movement is slightly easier. I think the other challenge I'll probably put out there is just really thinking about how reagents come in and they're cleared at ports of entry. That also is a bottleneck. So how do we collectively, as you said, in a regional way, think around breaking that bottleneck so that we can have access to reagents, and definitely echoing Anne's points between sort of, I'll say UVRI and ourselves. When we have challenges with reagents, we will swap notes and say, do you have this, and can you support us in the interim as an order is coming through? But I think the biggest challenge as well for us as Africans, and I think it's amazing that we do what we do given our limitations, we really got to plan our work. And so I think that's one of the major things that I must admit we're good at doing, because we face the limitation of reagents trickling in. I mean, that shouldn't be the case. So really thinking around how do we push these companies to set up stations here, and then we can begin to diversify across the different platforms that we're doing. So that would be my input. Thank you.
Isabel.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. I think there is two things I want to mention. Obviously, manufacturer. And in this sense, I think my message to them is that when it comes to global health, they should see not Africa like as a small cost, but probably an investment for the future. Because when it comes to global health, I can definitely say that we are the continent of future, in the sense that the pathogen are there. I mean, there is still quite a lot of important things to do in terms of health. And sequencing can be a game changer when it comes to surveillance and those things that are important to alerts like the global communities. And second, I think one important aspect for us, at least, has been to work out the logistics in collaboration with the customs, with all the different stakeholders at the national level. Because one thing that may be tricky for people, even when they're willing to send reagent and machine, is they may sit for some time at the borders because custom is not working properly or we do not have a good mechanism. So working that out may be something very, very important. And when it comes to maintenance, I think it's very important that the manufacturer develop a very strong group of distributors. We have a distributor now in Senegal for some of those machines and reagents. And one of the things that we're pushing is not only to train those distributors, specialists of maintenance, but also in our institutions, we have people specialized in maintenance. So having them being trained properly to do like at least the first layer of intervention is critical. I'll stop there, Alan. Thanks. Thanks.
Well, I see, Tulia, your hand was there. Is it a response to my question before we move to another topic?
Yes, yes. So that's something that we have been engaging a lot with the manufacturers. Yeah, one thing that I believe strongly, yeah, is that we need to be able to compete with the international market. Yeah. And one thing that we have engaged, for example, with the CEO of Illumina, Francis de Souza, and engaging also with the Oxford Nanopore Technologies, yeah, is to challenge them to give us prices, for example, 10% cheaper than anywhere in the world. Yeah. Why they would do that in such a small market? Yeah. The reason that if they do that, one, we're going to help the world to detect pathogens before they become epidemic. Is a big investment for global investment. Yeah, we're going to be we're going to be able to compete for the top scientific grants. A lot of times, for example, Christian and I, we have the very big machines, the Nova 6000. But if we try to generate a whole human genome on this machine, it will cost twice the same price in Africa that is outside there. And so that's what we have to do. We have to talk to this manufacturer and say that for their interest, it's for the global interest, and that would allow to create a market in South Africa, in general, and also would be able to solve a lot of the world problems, both on infectious disease, but also in these amazing high genomes that we have in Africa, human genomes. We have a lot of secrets that we have to unlock there, but we need to be competitive. Yeah, I don't know if Christian want to comment. We deal with them together sometimes.
I think maybe,
okay, I guess my colleagues have addressed. Okay, Alan, over.
Yeah, I think maybe let us, and I'm just watching some of the questions coming in, and so maybe let us then touch on this capacity development theme that seem to be recurrent in a lot of what we do on the continent, and we certainly know that there is a large amount of external stakeholders that are certainly willing to assist in various forms. But having looked at these 2 years from where you as experts are within the context of not only your sequencing hubs, but your work in the context of national public health labs, driving research in the context of generating information as it pertains to responding to pandemics, we are reminded more and more that, you know, there are lots of week-long workshops that are being proposed. There are many people that have a knee-jerk reaction to a need for training because of an immediate crisis. What, in your view, is the type of training that we have to evolve to as a continent in order to be responsive to public health threats? And I will start with Christian, happy seeing that I stopped him in the previous round of questions. Please carry on.
Yeah, I do think that we need different type of trainings. I think and in most cases, I think what works best in the context of Africa, and then from what we've seen within this pandemic, our face-to-face trainings and technical assistance are very, very powerful. Within this pandemic, with Africa CDC working on flying people down to our labs. We've seen the impact because you train them on these machines, they understand it, they learn from people that are experienced, and when they go back to their countries, they can generate sequence data within a week. Well, we've seen cases like that. For instance, in our case, we trained people from Rwanda. Within a week, they were posting hundreds of genomes. The other cases scenario is, for instance, we do have institutions in Africa that do have equipment in their own lab, in their own settings, but they're having technical difficulties in operating and making those and generating data from those equipment. And we've seen also a case whereby we had institutions in Africa that had an equipment, a next generation sequencer for 1 year, and they couldn't just generate that. But we deployed a team down there, and within a week, they were able to show them how to generate the sequences and analyze those sequences themselves. That is end-to-end, wet lab followed by bioinformatic analysis. And within 2 weeks, and 2 weeks after that, they had posted over 700 genomes. So I think such trainings where you take on to people in the environment and the context in which they're evolving is very powerful, because you can actually look at the environment and address the challenges, right there. And then they will just take over immediately after you leave, and then they fly with it. I think such trainings are very important because they can learn from you and then from the expert, and then they go back with those knowledge and apply. Or you could also deploy a team right where they are and address their challenges in their own context and their own environment, and then they can actually just start flying on their own. Thank you.
Thank you. Dorothy, I see your hand.
Yes. Thank you, Alan. I think Christian has said it very well, because I was going to elaborate on the follow-up and on-site training that sometimes you bring people to your facility, and most of these hubs have elaborate infrastructure, and so things may be very sophisticated to the people that we train. And so we need to not do just a one-time training, but the training should be staggered and should be progressive training, in that you bring them to your lab where it's sort of top-notch lab, you train them, but then there's a need for the on-site follow-up. And even at the on-site training, I think after that, it shouldn't end there, but there should be a lot of open discussions and follow-ups. And even we could also within this build a very strong EQA system, whereby we continually support these other sort of smaller laboratories in terms of their capacity. And if there's a problem, immediately we need to detect and follow up to support them. The other thing that I think that we are doing we've started very well. We've started with the sequencing very well, but I think in terms of the training, it should not end with just the sequencing, but then how do we analyze the sequences that we have? How do we use them to model, to do a lot of modeling to predict what is going to happen in future? I think that is another level of training that we need to sort of start. And I think this will help everyone so that we don't need to sort of having using the data effectively for public health control, and also predicting future events that we anticipate to come. I think that training is also very much needed for the continent. Thank you.
Can I just ask you in terms of just a clarity, just for the people listening, you mentioned an EQA system. Are you suggesting it is not currently routine enough? It is something that we see lacking? Could you expand on that?
It is, but I think probably we need to activate it more and sort of having routine, because sometimes some of these problems come and then people may be a bit limited in terms of how to solve it. So the EQA is going, but I think we need to make it more routine, sort of a routine issue that we can say that within, let's say, the TB diagnostic system, whereby every quarter or bi-monthly, there are samples submitted to central labs, or either is panel testing, or it is sending samples to other individual labs for analysis. I think we need to sort of make it more routine than within.
And maybe just, And maybe just to let the audience know that it is certainly as part of optimizing this pathogen network, there is certainly steps put in place now to try and streamline that. And I think that what needs to underpin our network is certainly a guarantee of the quality assurance of what we are generating, both within the wet lab as well as the underlying data. I saw a hand from Tulio. Tulio, did you want to comment on the training?
Yes, just a very quick comment. Yeah. One thing that we found very effective, as we have received dozens and dozens of countries to come for training in our lab, is to tell them that we will do a training on their samples, and how to write a report to the minister, not to write a paper. And what I find, Alan, is that sometime 10 p.m., we have to expel them out of our lab and say, it's enough for today. And next day, they are there back at 7 a.m., Just the motivation that they get by working their own samples and be able to, during the training, a couple of weeks, go back with a report to the minister. We found that absolute phenomenal. And I think that's something that we should really encourage, training in real samples that have a real report back to the country. Over.
And I saw a hand from Isabel. The mic is yours.
Thank you. I think just a small point to add on. I totally agree. In addition to just really thinking about how we evolve the thing from the wet lab into the bioinformatics, is really around the data and ensuring that we've got the robust data so that we can combine the whole lot and then inform how we respond to the pandemic. I think some of the lessons we've learned is just really giving feedback, whether it is to the labs who are collecting data, because when you do research, you think it's a routine. Data collection is routine, but even having missing data can really complicate your analysis. So really seeing how we build capacity on that so that those we train understand the whole pipeline from how well the sample is collected, how well the data is collected, how well you do your laboratory experiment in the wet lab, and then how you're going to interpret that data. And then at the end, I guess as Tulio says, just really how you convert that data not into a scientific paper, but something that the Ministry of Health or the public health officials will understand. So just really looking at that whole pipeline, I think would be important. Over to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And maybe seeing that we are busy with this topic of data techniques in the lab, training on us, and maybe I'll put Anne on the spot here. Do you perhaps want to conclude this training component by just mentioning some of the work that you are doing in trying to integrate the bioinformatics and the epidemiology?
For sure. I think we work very closely. We're part of the public health laboratory, so we get the data. For SARS-CoV-2, we get the numbers and the cases and the additional details that are then reported on a daily and a weekly basis. And we're trying to link the metadata and the data that we have from our sequencing with those data to then generate epidemiologically meaningful reports. In addition, I think we're thinking ahead to what we will do in the future, thinking what surveillance networks that we already have set up, which ones could we use to continue this so that we don't lose data as testing comes down and as specimens become less, trying to look at systematic ways to capture and use data sources and databases from surveillance that then are linked to the sequencing to generate reasonable reports. And I think just generally for all the comments that were made related to training, I have to commend all the efforts that have been made. And I think one other important aspect for training is to empower the trainees, tell them they know things already, they do know what to do, and we can guide them and stand by them. I think an episode of training is a once off, but there's this element of keeping collaboratively working with all our colleagues, even once they've had training. And I think that has come out in the other comments as well. Over.
Thank you very much. And maybe that is a good segue into really maybe just stopping a bit and just reflecting on data production and what we do with it. We've certainly seen as an immediate response to COVID-19, it was really in standing up the kind of sequencing that was needed in order to do surveillance across the continent. And so with that in place now, and if we start to project the capability of much of our sequencing capacity on the continent, I think we really have to sit back and think about the data governance as we're moving forward. And so a question that I'd like to pose to each of you really is, when you are thinking in the context where you find yourself in data production, sharing of that information at various levels, be it within country to a particular information line reporting, as well as globally, to what extent do you think we can improve on that? And also, do you feel that it is possible for us to ethically share information within the pandemic or within this pandemic? So to all of you, I've got two questions. You can choose to answer one or the other. Within the context where you are finding yourself in this milieu of data production, maybe just how would you suggest would be the way to share information across various chains of command, lines of reporting, and or the possibility for us to actually ethically share data in the context of COVID-19 pandemic? And I think what we are very well aware of is that we are constantly faced with a range of disease outbreaks on the continent. I see Anne, I see your hand is up first. Please carry on.
So, one advice and from my experience is to set up data sharing and material sharing agreements, but do them now, do them before the next whatever outbreak or whatever happens, and make them permissive. So use the time that we have now to look at the legal aspects, to make sure that we have all the right governance parameters in place, that we've done all the right things, that we anonymize our data, make it safe, share it safely, to do all that work, and then allow the agreements to be over years, to allow them not to have to be re-signed or recreated every year or so, and also to allow them to cover several, think of them as outbreak related, pandemic related, make them permissive. So spend all our energies now to make sure that they are compliant and that we are truly compliant with all the requirements, both nationally and within the continent and internationally. But then allow for the fact that we have overarching agreements that then allow us to work quite freely when there's a need. Over.
I see two hands, Christian and then Tulio.
Yeah, I think the issue of data can be very sensitive, but can also be very useful and very helpful, especially in the context of an epidemic or a pandemic. At country level, I think it's very useful because it enables the country actually to harness information and then to respond often in a very targeted and guided manner. And then when you take it at a different level, continental and then other levels, as I mentioned, I think there is a need to have a very strong framework where we all act very responsibly. And one thing that I see, if that framework is not done in period of peace like now, or maybe after this pandemic, is the fact that, you know, when data are shared and there's no benefit in terms of, you know, of return in data shared.
Christian, we're losing you with the audio. I'm going to come back to Krishna, happy to make his point about the challenges of not having
to create some kind of resentment. It will create a resentment and prevent people from sharing more, you know, in the future.
All right, so Krishna, we actually lost you there for a short while, and I think your point towards the end was around the challenge of not having a framework in place.
But I was saying that we need to put a framework where people should act responsibly, and people should understand that there is a lot in sharing data, in giving out, because as you are giving out, I think it should just be equitable and fair enough and ethical, for giving back, basically sharing also back the benefit for data sharing. I don't think it makes sense to share data, and then when the data are used to create countermeasures, those countermeasures are not accessible by those people that share the data, or people are being told that you can't even have the opportunity to share into the IP, that accrue from those data. I think there should be a framework that hold people accountable and then make people more responsible. And I think this will encourage free data sharing in the future. But this is a time to work on such a framework. Thank you.
Absolutely. Tulia?
So I have been responsible for a lot of the sharing of the variants with our government. We end up creating a very effective system that within the same day, the Minister of Health is informed if it's very important. The same day, the President is briefed. Yeah. Within less than 24 hours, the data is shared with the Africa CDC and with the WHO, and that can be done very quick. Yeah. And it has to be done appropriately, but has to be done very quick, because a quick response and identification of epidemics do guide response that save lives. And also epidemics travel fast very well. For example, both on the Beta and the Omicron, if we haven't shared that very quick, with less than 24 hours, as we have shared the data with permission from our government, yeah, that was already detected in over 15 countries, yeah, and that's the reality. Epidemics and pandemics, they move very fast. So, for example, in Brazil, that they describe a gamma variant, yeah, they didn't describe. It was Japan that described in Brazilian travelers, yeah. So we have to share quick, yeah, but we have to make sure that all levels are very well informed, both national government, Africa continental, and the WHO, because if that's not done effectively and quick, other people will detect it elsewhere, and they will also put like a shade about people not being transparent with epidemics, and that can be very damaging for a country. But I completely agree with Christian and with you, Alan. We also have to make sure that if they develop a vaccine, so yesterday a vaccine on Omicron was approved, yeah, and there's no discussion about supporting South Africa and Botswana that identify the variant, and then we have to try to force to change that if they develop diagnostics and vaccines and therapies, that these are make available, or that some financial incentives come back to the country. Over.
I'm going to just, and I was just reminded that we were just short of 10 minutes left for the session, and so I maybe want to ask you as a panel. We've had lots of gains, and much has been mentioned about the success of the SARS-CoV-2 surveillance response on the continent. Much has been invested into the continent at the level of infrastructure, as well as human capital development. How ready are we for the next pathogen or for the next disease outbreak? And if we are ready, how do we in fact sustain this? And this seems to have been a question that was raised by, certainly within the opening remarks, by our leadership. So the question to you is, and if you could keep your answers brief, how ready are we to sustain what we have gained so far in dealing with the next pandemic that will come away? And we certainly have enough of those that we are challenged with daily. And we've got certainly 2 sequencing hubs in East and West Africa. And so I am going now just by process of prioritizing those that we haven't heard in the last round. And so I'm going to ask Isabel and then Amadou to respond first. Thanks, Isabel.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Yeah, so I just essentially think we're at an exciting point in Africa in terms of where we've come from. Africa CDC already started looking at capacity in the continent even before the pandemic. At that time, I can imagine there were only a few labs that had capacity, or maybe 1 or 2 machines and 1 or 2 bioinformaticians. The 2 years has allowed a lot of training to carry on, a lot of cross-talk and collaboration across countries. And so I think we are well placed at the moment to respond. I think if we take the lessons of the COVID-19 pandemic, when probably a lot of us thought we didn't have capacity, we did step up, we did respond, we did adapt ourselves and modify what we had to respond to the pandemic. But what I do think is important to ensure that we maintain this is that we really need to think of genomic surveillance as something routine, so that we maintain the momentum and we don't, as the saying goes, sort of drop the ball. So COVID seems it's here to stay. So we keep the training, and we keep the training across the continent, across institutions, and we look to through Africa CDC, ASLM, WHO, Afro, thinking around how we maintain the supply chain so that we can continue the genomic surveillance. But in terms of just documenting what we've learned, documenting how we adapted ourselves and modified our teams so that they could respond, that's the approach we should take. And then just know that in our minds, that even now we're more ready than when the COVID-19 pandemic came. But we should ensure that we've got, I think for me, the real gap at the moment is the bioinformaticians in place, and ensure that we can maintain them and keep them on this continent after all this training, so that we keep growing up, building up the next crop of genomic scientists on the continent. Thank you.
Isabella, Amadou?
Yes, thank you very much, Alan. I think we are as ready as the weakest link, which for me is the surveillance. If we don't have samples, pathogen to feed all the infrastructure that we've built, then we won't be able actually to react and be ready for the next pandemic. So for me, it's as critical as supporting the surveillance to get the right information, the samples to channel to the lab, to build the whole infrastructure we're doing, and for which amazing work has been done. So for me, investment should go to surveillance. And when we talk about actually all this infrastructure that has been built, I think it's very important to sustain it, to work a lot on the framework that the different people have mentioned, Christian and Anne, and make sure that there is this ownership and there's a clear understanding of the whole stakeholders, the important to deal with things like IP, make sure that there is the ultimate beneficiary of what we're doing is actually the population we're getting all this information from. And third, make sure that we keep a process by which these quite quickly evolving environment and knowledge is being actually worked out to have people on a regular capacity building and exchange. This is for me very important to invest once again on this infrastructure of trust where people share information, because at some point that sharing that would make a huge difference. Something that happened in South Africa can be taken seriously by other parts of the world. It needs this trust, and South Africa not being punished for giving this information. And for me, that's what is really critical if you want to be ready for the next pandemic, and make sure that people can do that. And last thing is we need to cascade this knowledge that exists today in these specific actually hubs that have this opportunity privilege, no matter what you call it, to be where they are, to make sure that it is as widespread as it is in other countries. So just, I mean, as probably if I don't have opportunity, I really want to thank once again Africa CDCs and all the panelists, and also thank the different leaders that we have, like John, like Chidi, all these people, Waho, and all these people that did tremendous work in bringing us where we are now. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And we've got 2 minutes left. And I think I think we should actually wrap up now. And I think I'm going to just conclude. And I just know that there would be somebody in the audience that is really wanting to either embark on this further, looking to our panelists as experts as to what direction to take? Are there any gems that you could suggest as a tip for them as they move forward? Many might be postdoctoral fellows embarking on the next expedition, grad students submitting that most annoying thesis. If I could ask you one tip that you'd have for somebody who is on this trajectory of developing their career in genomics with a view to contribute to disease surveillance, would one of you want to suggest a tip? I cannot take all 6 of you to give a comment. I'm going to be told to stop the session very soon. There's one hand, and you've got the floor.
I can be very quick. I would tell them to teach someone else next to them so that we teach each other, that we don't hold on to our knowledge. Please share your knowledge. Let's learn and teach together. It will stand us in good stead.
So thank you very much. And I think this will now conclude our session. To our audience, I think what has really come out of the session is that if we are to prepare for the next crisis, we have to put in place certain mechanisms, certain frameworks. We have to, and to quote the phrase used by my panelists, we have to build this trust capital that is going to sustain us during the midst of a crisis. And so I think that as we look to this moving forward, there's been some wonderful frameworks put in place, and I think of ones done by the Public Health Alliance for Genomic Epidemiology that is really asking, can we conceptualize a framework whereby which data generators can have certainly some rules of engagement that would speak to some sort of mechanism by which people are then being certainly recognized for their contributions to the work that is being done. And so I do want to thank the panelists for your role, for your contribution this afternoon. And certainly I would like to ask that you would stay on for the next session. We're going to have the next session, which is really going to be engaging our partners. And I think what has come out in this session has been, if we are to sustain the gains that we have, there's definitely going to be a need to strengthen the public-private partnerships as we move forward in order to make sure that we can produce the kind of sustainability which we are looking for. And so what I'm going to ask that we take a 5-minute break. We'll have a 5-minute bio break. You can top up your mugs. We will then return for the next session, which will be chaired by my colleague Joseph. And so thank you so much to my panelists, and thank you to the audience for contributing to the discussion. Thanks.
I'll request that the panelists for the next session, the partner session, if you're in attendance, if you can switch on your cameras and be ready for the introductory session. And thank you again for availing yourself and taking the time to be here.
Hi, Joseph, can you hear me?
Hi, David. Hi, Manisha.
Hello, good afternoon. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, David.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Early morning for you, as always.
Actually, it's very late. I'm in Singapore, so.
Oh, congratulations on the announcement in Singapore. I think that's the center is just getting launched, right?
Yeah, I'll mention it in my comments. So.
Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hey, Manisha, it's been a long time.
Hello. Yes, it has. It's good to see you. And maybe it's time we get caught up a bit. So good to see you, Jay.
That would be great. David, it's good to see you too. And Joseph, thanks for inviting us to participate.
For joining and accepting to be part of this.
And Vanessa, it's very nice to meet you as well. I don't think we've met before, but greetings.
Nice to see you. Yeah, I think we've been on an event or two, but it's been, a while for sure. Yeah, good to see you all.
I think we're all good to go in the next few minutes. From what I hear, the sound is perfect. I can see you all clearly. And we'll have about an hour, and hopefully we should cover enough ground within the hour. But again, thank you all for coming, and appreciate you making time for this. I know some of you, it's an awkward time of the morning, but you're welcome. So let's be ready for a start in the next few minutes.
So Joseph, what question are you going to throw at us so we're prepared?
I think it's basically going to be, I'd like to make it feel like there's a follow-up to the previous session. So a couple of issues that were raised. Again, we have different kind of partners here. We have, I think, a bilateral partner in the name of US government. We have 2 philanthropic organizations in the name of Rockefeller and BMGF, and 2 industry partners, ONT and Illumina. So it's going to be a mix of questions that will target the different aspects of the partnership. Yeah. Is that okay?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Joseph, you didn't really give us, the specifics, but we'll get there.
Yeah. I think you
fine,
were
just kidding. Sorry.
Were you all able to join in the previous session?
Yes.
So I think if there are follow-up issues, you did listen, so you probably may want to touch on some of those. But again, I think I shared a couple of questions. I may not follow that script, but I will see. It's going to be going with the flow. So I think we are ready to start. Thank you and good afternoon, good morning, good evening from wherever you're joining us from. This is going to be a continuation of the discussion that we've had. We are commemorating attainment of uploading of 100,000 SARS-CoV-2 genomes from the continent. It's a big achievement that has been facilitated by a lot of us partners, scientists on the continent, and listening in from the previous session, we know that this would not have been possible if we didn't have support of the different players. This particular session is going to focus on support from our partners, what has helped us achieve what we have achieved, and joining us will be partners representing the philanthropic sector. We will have partners from the industry, and we also have a partner from one of our bilateral friends, the US government. And so in no certain order, I will introduce the team on this particular panel. We have James Breyer, who's Director Segment Marketing, Life Science Research at Oxford Nanopore Technologies. We have Vanessa Moder, who is the Director of Medical Affairs, Global Health and Infectious Disease at Illumina. We have Dr. David Blazes, who's the Deputy Director of Vaccine Development and Surveillance at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We have Manisha Binge, who's the Managing Director of Global Networks and Partnerships at the Rockefeller Foundation. And we have Dr. Duncan McConnell, who is the Chief Science Officer, Office of Advanced Molecular Detection at the US CDC. So, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome, or good morning from wherever you're joining us. We're looking forward to this exciting conversation, marking the attainment of the upload of 100,000 SARS-CoV-2 genomes by the African continent. I will be floating a couple of questions to the panelists, but before we start, I'd like to have each and every one of you make some opening remarks, and I would like to focus on the question of what we've seen, with the rapid innovation and adoption of genome sequencing technology and its adoption on the continent, and even the rapid deployment of equipment and capacity on the continent. This has, of course, created a lot of opportunities, but there's been challenges, and there's been, there are changes that need to be effected. So I'll probably, in the same order as I introduced you, ask you for your opinion, to what is the future or in terms of the genomic sequencing technology on the African continent. So I'll start with you, James Breyer, from ONT Oxford Nanopore Technologies. James, over to you.
Thank you so much, Joseph. I'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to participate today and share the stage with these distinguished panelists. We are here today to recognize and reflect on the accomplishments and countless individuals who really contributed to the sequencing of this first 100,000 SARS-CoV-2 genomes across Africa. And while this is a huge achievement, it is also a tragic commemoration of the lives that were affected by the virus. And we are very humbled to be a part of this community, fighting its impact and working to ensure that we have the tools to create a safer environment for future threats. This milestone could not have been achieved without the coordinated effort of many organizations. We worked with the teams at the Africa PGI and public health labs across Africa to help support their efforts and establish SARS-CoV-2 sequencing capacity for Africa. At Oxford Nanopore Technologies, we believe that sequencing is for everyone. This could not have been more important over the past 2 years when whole genome sequencing became the technique of choice to monitor the transmission and the evolution of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. This unique feature of nanopore technology has enabled its use by scientific community for the rapid sequencing of pathogens in multiple outbreak situations, including the likes of Zika, Ebola, yellow fever, and currently swine flu. These experiences have driven the rapid deployment of nanopore sequencing in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And at Oxford Nanopore Technologies, we delivered a low-cost solution that has zero capital cost and a simple workflow that enabled broad adoption among experienced sequencing labs and labs that had never before sequenced a viral genome. We work closely with groups in the community academically, both the Arctic Network, who developed the workflow for the rapid preparation of the SARS-CoV-2 whole genomes, that is being utilized by scientists around the world. Their functional work and the work by Nikki Fried and Olin Cylinder formed the core of the workflows available for nanopore sequencing with the SARS-CoV-2. These efforts led to the development of the Midnight method for sequencing SARS-CoV-2. And I'll expand on why I want to bring this up, because this approach offered a simple, rapid method for the sequencing of the virus and provided a low-cost sample cost for users across the continent. The kits for the Midnight protocol were developed for the face of the challenges that were posed by the pandemic. With constrained logistics during the height of the pandemic, reagent acquisition was not easy. And the Midnight kit was designed to include all the reagents that were required for sequencing that would hopefully simplify the logistics and allow sequencing to continue unfettered. We observed throughout the pandemic of SARS-CoV-2 as it evolved, and we saw many different strains emerge throughout the pandemic, many of which were characterized in the continent of Africa. These changes that were observed created challenges for the assays that we developed, and we responded appropriately to these changes to allow that updates were communicated and delivered to the community without any interruption or minimal interruption to the sequencing efforts. But it doesn't matter how our MinION sequencing device is a small, portable, and can fit in the palm of your hand. If your lab can't integrate the technology and the solution that it provides into your workflow, it's not going to achieve broad utilization. The success required the ability to perform remote trainings. I know this came up in the first session, and I'm sure we'll have lots of discussions about this in this session today. But our scientists were not able to travel during this time. So we had to adapt to that situation and work with many organizations to develop creative solutions to not only train direct customers in a remote fashion, but to train our users to become the trainers so that we can do direct training, and then those users could then go off and expand the capability of our ability to train more labs to allow us to get more adoption of the platform. As a result, the African community was very successful in building the capacity and develop a network of labs all across Africa, and now are capable of performing what I would consider high-guided genomic surveillance. This will provide an invaluable resource to the community and the entire continent. Resources of trained users can now perform sequencing in their local labs, in the field, or wherever the need is the greatest. This distributed network of sequencer creates a capacity in Africa and now lead to some interesting opportunities. How will this vast resource of the sequencers and expertise be used beyond the current COVID-19 outbreak? What can we do with the sequencing infrastructure that's in place across Africa to expand beyond SARS-CoV-2? Because we now can, because we should. As a result of the nanopore sequencing during the COVID-19 pandemic, labs across Africa have accelerated in the democratization of sequencing. The infrastructure is now there to help track and respond to, including the recent monkeypox cases. Recently, we have seen in the news cases of monkeypox emerge and how nanopore sequencing in our platform has been able to quickly leverage the ability to generate the initial genomes for the surveillance of this newly emerging outbreak. This is the value of a low-cost sequencing device and its ubiquity to public health labs and be able to respond when the need arises. There are many other pathogens of threat that can now be monitored. We are pleased that we are able to continue to support ongoing research that has having a positive impact on public health labs across Africa, and to develop and build this network of sequencers in the fight against infectious disease. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James. Now I'll invite Vanessa Moder from Illumina to make her brief remarks. I'll give you 3 minutes.
Sure, thank you so much. This has been such a rich discussion. I really appreciate the ability to be included. And I really can't tell you how thrilled I am to be able to participate in this celebratory event, because Illumina became involved in the PGI fairly early. And we're so grateful to our friends at Africa CDC and the Gates Foundation for engaging us as partners in the opportunity. In the early planning days of 2020, the vision was clear, but it really felt kind of lofty. And because clearly we've all heard of the barriers to meaningfully moving forward with this technology in Africa, but we were all in. I think because we saw the leadership at Africa CDC and at the labs, and really felt the potential to impact public health if we're successful. And it's been such an amazing journey to watch. The milestones have been exceeded and a great foundation is being laid. And the credit really goes to Africa CDC, who've just built an incredible and very capable team to organize and drive the network, and certainly to the participating labs, who've been both engaged and patient as we learn together and work to close the gaps in supply and support, especially during the darkest days of the pandemic. COVID-19 has really been a catalyst that's lit a fire under this collection of partners to ensure that Africa obtains a leadership position in pathogen genomic surveillance and has greatly improved public health preparedness. But I think one of the things that strikes me most about the PGI is just how successful the model is with this broad group of cross-sector partners coming together for a shared mission. And working together to create a holistic ecosystem of sustainability. We're tackling head-on many of the challenges that have plagued past efforts to drive new technology adoption in Africa. And we can already see how these learnings are being applied to activities for the future in both Africa and beyond. At Illumina, we're keenly aware of the barriers to access, as have been discussed today. And we're really committed to tackling these directly. So I appreciated the earlier comments about the need for direct support on the continent and for responsive service. So we're looking at innovative commercial models, creative training and support programs, and new paths for supply to ensure that there's continued sustainable access to genomics for infectious disease and beyond. And I know that we need to be humble and open to feedback and continue to learn from the labs and the key stakeholders so we can continually get better. On the infectious disease front, we really see enormous potential beyond SARS-CoV-2. And indeed, we're now collectively planning for what comes next. The ability to leverage the new foundation of capabilities for a variety of applications, both management of endemic threats such as TB and malaria, as well as newly emerging pathogens, will be crucial to protecting public health in the future. And this is really the power of genomics, not only to enable us to ask questions of a sample that have never been possible before, but also to have a great synergy across application areas, which can ultimately lead to a much broader range of capabilities than with traditional methods. And so we look forward to exploring how Africa can leverage this foundation to address non-communicable diseases as well, such as cancer and genetic diseases, as well as to fuel research with crucial information about the wonderfully diverse genetic makeup of the people across the continent. So in closing, we just feel incredibly privileged to be a part of this journey because it's clear that we're creating something really exciting and empowering. We're grateful for the partnership from all of the players in the PGI ecosystem, and we just can't wait to see what great things will come next. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. Dr. David Blazes, BMGF, or the Bill and Melinda Gates, saw the vision way before the pandemic. What is your vision of the horizon?
Thank you, Joseph. And I just have to add up front my congratulations sincerely to Africa CDC and to all the scientists who made this milestone possible. It's an honor for me to join this panel discussion, and I say that really humbly. You know, well, 100,000 is a number, but I think it's a really important number to celebrate because, you know, a year or so ago, I think there were 50-some hundred sequences and impending variants popping up, and it clearly the number was not representative of the global population, and so when we talked about this, you know, Africa CDC stood up and said, you know, we need to act aggressively here, and I would say that has happened. I mean, 20 times the number in about a year is just amazing, and it's not only a number, it's the quality and diversity of samples that is roundly celebrated around the world by genomicists, and you know, much better than in many countries that have much greater capacity to do sequencing. So it is just truly amazing what you all have done. I'm actually in Singapore right now, so it's the evening, and I'm here with a group of scientists and public health officials who just launched the Asia PGI, which you know, is a sister initiative to you. It's largely mirroring the model that you all created and implemented in Africa. And I can tell you that there is so much excitement, you know, for them to learn from you, to learn what worked, what didn't work, your experiences in setting up this network, and how to improve public health in a region. So at the meeting today, I was on another panel a few hours ago, and they asked me, so why has Africa PGI been so successful? And I said many things, but I'll mention just a few of those. I think the extreme cooperation that was evident on the first panel among scientists and among countries is remarkable and not routine yet in many public health endeavors. And I think that is to be commended and called out. I think the commitment to training that Christian and Anne and Tulio really spoke about passionately is also key, and that commitment, I think, can be replicated, but again, you all need to be commended for that commitment. I think also the recognition that public health priorities have to be defined by local and regional needs, and really explicitly linked to public health action. And again, I don't need to replicate or repeat what you all said so elegantly before, but that is the key to surveillance. It's having actions and not being punished. I think we have a lot of work to do in the global health community to solve those solutions, but to solve those problems. I'll just say a few things. I think we all know that COVID has accelerated the interest in genomic sequencing. People know what it is now across the board, which I think is amazing. We've learned a lot as a global public health community, but there are many challenges that still exist, and the previous panel really outlined those, so I won't go through them again. I think the key to sustaining this capacity, though, is when SARS-CoV-2 does go away, we have to definitely broaden the use cases to more pathogens and demonstrate the value to governments so that the value of genomic sequence data for epidemiologic and clinical decision making is clear. And then finally, I'll just say we do have to continue to innovate and explore new ways to include genomic sequence data and genomic epidemiology into a broader integrated surveillance platform. This is not done well, except in a few countries. We all know those countries, including some from Africa. We've all waited with bated breath for results from South Africa, from the UK, and a few other countries. And that integrated surveillance platform must be expanded upon. We have to link to clinical and epidemiologic data streams. We should explore novel solutions to using environmental surveillance and such. So there's a lot of work to do, but I think this is a great time to celebrate the success that you all have had and to share this success with the broader scientific community. So again, congratulations, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, David. Manisha, Rockefeller was a partner from the onset. They saw the potential, they put their money in it. Your opening remarks.
Thank you, Joseph. It's very hard to be on, one of the last people in the panel since a lot is already said. But really want to emphasize what an accomplishment we are celebrating today. And again, congratulations to the Africa CDC. This is a testament to the leadership shown by the regional institution. It's also a testament to the scientific community that came in the panel, represented in the panel before us, showcasing what is possible, the collaboration, the commitment, and the courage that was shown by these scientists in an unprecedented moment that we have been in over the past year. And it really brought to the front the actual as well as the latent capabilities that are available across the continent. And that's what we are celebrating today. And that's what I'm hoping that this community is going to keep aligned and remain in collaboration to take it forward and drive towards sustainability. At the Rockefeller Foundation, Joseph, you mentioned, we have supported efforts for the Africa CDC for the past 2 years, starting with our collaboration around testing and tracing, and then leaning into expanding genomic surveillance within the continent. The foundation has a history, and 100-year history of really leveraging science and technology to address global challenges and in global health, particularly. In the 21st century, that means harnessing the data revolution and the genomic revolution. And this brings us, it creates a confluence of opportunity at a very pivotal time, not only on the African continent, but globally across all regions. We have been very proud to be part of some of this effort and really supporting the scientists that we heard from in the previous panel. Professor Tullio, Professor Happy, we've worked very closely with them. We're working closely with Professor Amadou, some of the leading thinkers and regional experts, and harnessing their capabilities, their vision, and their, again, courage to take this agenda forward. We have learned a lot over the past year, and I want again, emphasize and re-emphasize that. But a key point point I want to make is the role of Africa CDC in bringing this together. We've moved from what could be a niche approach, relegated to scientific efforts in a laboratory, to a very mainstream methodology for not just infectious disease surveillance, but as Vanessa pointed out, a broader suite of applications in global health and medicine more broadly. What we have in place is a common market that Africa CDC has really brought together. That has unlocked tremendous economies of scale, not just in understanding where what the access needs are, what the priorities are, and really bringing down costs that it takes for us as partners to engage across key stakeholders within the continent. It allows us a point of aggregation, and we've seen this possible both from a supply chain standpoint, from a methodology standpoint, from understanding key priorities, as well as from an information and data sharing. In the past, the global community has seen engagement at the national level or the global level. What you have shown is what it means to have a regional institution that really addresses and represents priorities of member states in a timely manner, acknowledging the nuances, the context, and the heterogeneity of the member states and their particular needs and concerns. Where we see tremendous opportunity going forward is around really supporting this level of this degree of aggregation in a way that allows a platform where partners can engage, understand what the needs are across member states from a capacity, technology, supply chain standpoint, as well as from a priority standpoint. What are those routine utilization needs? And again, Professor Isabel in the last panel, emphasized that sustainability is going to be key. And for us to ensure that we keep the gains that we have made over the past 2 years, we really identify routine applications, mainstream applications, to keep not just the methodologies, the scientific efforts, the focus on capacity building, but also continuous availability of information and data so that we can be responsive to emerging and re-emerging infectious disease threats and ensure that the populations are protected within and across the region. I want to touch a little bit on the concept of the end-to-end surveillance that I think many panelists mentioned, and even David mentioned prior to me. We talk about sequencing, but as Professor Amadou mentioned, we are as good as our weakest link, and it is the access to samples, the sequencing capabilities, and the translation into response. All of it together drives a virtuous cycle that we have started and we need to continue. And it is our pleasure, from the Rockefeller Foundation and the Pandemic Prevention Institute that was launched last year to help support some of this agenda, to really work in partnership with Africa CDC, the scientists, as well as a broader partner network, and serve as a catalyst, a connector, a convener, and where necessary, an accelerator to drive some of these opportunities forward. So look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manisha. Finally, Dr. Duncan, what's your view of the horizon? You've been part of this right from the beginning. US CDC and the US government has been a partner on the continent prior to the pandemic for many decades, and of course you're going to be on the continent. Some opening remarks from you, Dr. Duncan.
Thanks, Joseph. And Manisha is right, going in last or being the last panelist to speak. A lot of the main points that I wanted to raise have already been touched on, but I think they do bear repeating. First and foremost, congratulations to Africa CDC and the many, many African scientists and public health institutions, the academic institutions, healthcare and community organizations. This is a truly important scientific milestone, and it is an honor to be here today to recognize that and to talk about our partnership. One thing that I think is important to really underscore is that labs across Africa have established themselves for many years before this, but especially in the past 3 years, as global leaders in pathogen genomics. And I truly believe we are on the cusp of a new era in global public health. David mentioned the newly announced Asia PGI and how many of the lessons from African scientists and from the African experience are proving critical in building this kind of capacity because these lessons can be applied elsewhere and some of the challenges really are shared, but that also creates common opportunities. This is true in Southeast Asia. This is also true in much of in other countries, in the United States, in much of Europe. A lot of the same types of challenges are being faced. How do we approach standardized bioinformatics? How do we tackle some of these data sharing issues? How do we approach data integration? How do we ensure fairness and equity around the information that is gathered, the skills that are required to leverage these kinds of capabilities? And how do we really use this to create a stronger global health ready state? We've really been fortunate to partner with Africa CDC over the last few years to help with the build out of the PGI laboratory network. But we've been fortunate to work before that with Alan and many other African scientists and scientists throughout the global South to identify ways that we can make bioinformatic tools and skills and analyses more accessible and more sustainable, more reproducible and more fair through organizations like the Public Health Alliance for Genomic Epidemiology, which has really helped to enable some of those conversations. I think some of these common challenges are a great jumping off point. I think they also, though, create some common opportunities. And I think really this is a place where the efforts in Africa have really shown how effective genomic surveillance can be in not only helping to manage and understand the local context of an epidemic or pandemic, but also to really shine, to establish a lighthouse for the world and to show how these technologies can be used effectively for global public health surveillance. I'm looking forward to the rest of the panel, and again, congratulations.
Thank you very much, Dr. Duncan, and all of you for your introductory remarks. Now, I would quickly want to move on to the question, and I want to pick up from where the previous panel left off, and there were quite a number of issues that came up during that discussion. We've all seen rapid deployment of equipment and technology, rapid deployment of resources. But the question that begs is, how do we sustain that momentum? The huge investment that has been made. And one of the things that came up, especially on the deployment of equipment, were issues of service support, supply chain challenges, issues of pricing and costing. I think I want to throw back this to the industry players here, Illumina and ONT, because I think it's been a question that has come up many a times, and I think even Professor Tulio has mentioned about having engagement with Illumina on the same. And we want to believe that this has not just been an investment that is going to waste that. There are strategies that will help us sustain that momentum, but also addressing those challenges that are picked up on, in terms of supply chain. How do we quickly make sure that the reagents are in place when they're needed? How do we make sure that we have service support close by to where the equipment is? How do we address issues of pricing so that we are not looking at huge disparities in price cost when it comes to the continent as opposed to the rest of the world, or the likes of Europe and the US? So I think this question I'll put forward to either Vanessa or James. Any one of you can respond, or both of you can respond. Vanessa, you can go first.
Sure, and thank you for the question. I mean, it's incredibly relevant because I was at the American Society for Microbiology Global Public Health Programs Committee meeting yesterday, and I told them I thought the word of the decade for us is sustainability, because I think we built, and now how do we sustain? And the issues that you brought up are so critical to that conversation. And I can just say the way we're really thinking about it is first we stop and listen. I think that's the most important thing, to really, truly, deeply understand the challenges. And then we just have to tackle them head on, one by one, in kind of bite-sized chunks, because these are very solvable problems. Some of the perceptions are historical, from the deep days of the pandemic when flights were not going and other things. Some of them absolutely linger for a variety of reasons. And so, I think each manufacturer is going to have their own unique challenges, but we will certainly share some as well, relating to the ability to, supply, relying on third-party components and other things. But, one of the things we're really trying to do is just put more people on the continent directly. So really starting to get involved, not from afar, but from within. And that's going to take time, but it's a process we've already started. And similarly, we're looking at pricing issues and really looking at specific use cases and saying, okay, what can we do differently here? Because we absolutely share the philosophy of that, things should not cost more. And we have to figure out some of these issues where we do not influence or control the added costs that are going to the end users. And I think, we're talking to the Gates Foundation and others about how can we look as an industry and more broadly at ways to reduce taxes and other import fees so that the end users can obtain very fair pricing. So, that's just one example, but certainly service and support. I think we need to start looking at key performance indicators more carefully and make sure we really have high expectations for ourselves about what are the response times for service and support. And it will be a journey, but I believe we're making a lot of progress and we still have quite a way to go. So I'll pass it over to James.
Vanessa, James.
Thanks, Vanessa. Yeah, I'd have to echo a lot of what Vanessa said. I mean, there are commonalities in terms of, as a supplier, that we encounter when we come into various countries. I think that, from the onset, we need to learn from what happened during the pandemic. I don't think anybody anticipated what happened and how we can respond to that, but we need to certainly respond better the next time. So I think we need to start thinking about, as vendors, how we maintain our supplies internally, so that we can maintain distribution of instrumentation as they're being requested in the field, and make sure that we can meet that demand, especially in a global need. I think that with regard to, support there in country, part of the issue that we ran into was, while we did have some support in country, it was the ability to get that support out into the field, to be able to see and interact with the customers that needed that support. So we need to work better to make sure that we have the right infrastructure and the right strategies to be able to properly support the different labs and the needs that they have with regard to training, instrumentation related issues, because all of those are important. Because if we can't keep the instruments running and keep the labs producing data, then we don't meet the goals and the objectives that were set forth. And I think that we did a good job as vendors supplying, but I think we can certainly do much better. I think the other thing that we need to think about is the push of consumables to keep the devices running, because that was also a challenge. We learned that, the pieces of the process, individual pieces became scarce, and it didn't matter whether or not we could supply our reagents. If some of the other critical reagents weren't available, the chain basically broke down and we were no longer able to keep people running. So we need to be able to look at the whole supply chain of all the elements that are involved in keeping these devices going, so that we can make sure that we're able to produce and generate the things that are needed in terms of the consumables to keep the instruments able to generate the sequencing data. And then I do agree with Vanessa that, we want to keep costs on par with the rest of the world. And we really try to strive for that for the people of Africa and people of the world, for that matter, with our pricing models. But we do have things that we encounter that are outside of our control. And I think the more communication, the more dialogue that we can have to understand those interactions with different countries and how we can obviate those charges, I think that will be helpful in terms of helping keep a parity in terms of the overall costs. And I'll put it back over to you, Joseph.
Thank you very much. Still on the issue of sustainability, and I'll probably throw this to either David or Manisha. A lot of the resources that have been availed have gone into either procurement of equipment, reagents, or capacity building. We've seen a lot of trainings that have been going on. But we know to sustain this momentum, we need domestic resources mobilized. Are we seeing commensurate effort for in-country developmental policies and strategies that will ensure whatever investment has been made can be sustained? What would be your view in terms of now pushing to the next level where we're looking at sustainability and that is supported by policy and that ensures these domestic finances for genomic sequencing and surveillance? Over to either David or Manisha.
I can start, David. I think this is a really important question that you asked, Joseph, because the key theme in this panel has been around sustainability, and the role of philanthropies and development finance can only be catalytic, and that's how we should consider it. One of the areas that we are really exploring going forward is, and I mentioned this in my opening remarks, is the routine application of these methodologies and approaches. What are key priorities? Where is there existing both financing and interest, not only at the domestic level, but also within other global infectious disease actors? And agencies like the Global Fund come to mind, who are one of the big funders of TB, malaria, HIV, and health systems across the continent. How can we move beyond COVID-19 surveillance, which is what this effort has been very focused on, shown us the art of possible, to really move in a more and have a more broader perspective, leveraging existing financing mechanisms, really understand where are there opportunities in terms of infrastructure development that you can mobilize and bring commercial financing or concessionary finance capital to bear, and really leverage flexible, grant-based or philanthropic aid resources in a way that builds both the infrastructure as well as, and I'm going to use the term market very broadly, because we need to ensure adequate demand and ongoing demand for these methodologies and approaches. And again, that will unlock the ability for a suite of financing mechanisms, both domestic, the broader global health, infectious disease portfolio of resources, as well as concessional financing for greater infrastructure application. So with that, David.
Thanks. Yeah, obviously a really important question. I think the road to sustainability is as I mentioned before, around building out those use cases and demonstrating value. So at the foundation, I work on what's called a functional team, which really works across a variety of pathogens and use cases. But we have these very specific program teams that focus on a specific disease, and so many of those have deep interest in sequencing and have made deep investments in molecular epidemiology, genomic epidemiology, and I'll call out a few. So malaria, Jen Gardy and her team have made deep investments, through many of your colleagues, to have impact on malaria control programs that are country-led and designed. And how genomic sequence data can be applied to decisions that countries make based on or for what aspects can be brought to bear against malaria. Antimicrobial resistance is another huge area that we can define better how antibiotics are used and how antibiotics are cycled or not used is key. And so, whether that's Klebsiella or other Enterobacteriaceae, whether it's pneumococcus, whether it's a bacteria that causes neonatal sepsis. All of those need to be better defined and resistance genes identified and tracked. So making that relevant to public health decision makers is key. On the continent right now, we're seeing the resurgence of polio. All of those cases are defined by sequence, and that has to be more rapid. It has to be reported more transparently, and decisions for vaccination campaigns can be made very quickly if those data are made available. So that's one. Cholera. Cholera is also seeing a resurgence. So we've seen cases of cholera in Pakistan and Bangladesh now, where sequencing is helping to drive the response. It's helping to define which populations will get vaccines and when, where cholera can be traced from, and obviously using environmental surveillance as, in addition to epi and clinical data is key. So we are supporting those use cases. We see, obviously, pathogen genomic sequencing is agnostic to pathogen. It can be used for a fungus as much as a virus, as much as a bacteria, and a parasite. So the more use cases we can demonstrate value in, I think that's going to, the more data shows up on a minister's desk from the sequencer, the easier it is to sustain that capacity. And you don't need a sequencer for each of those pathogens, but you do need expertise in all those pathogens that obviously has to be expanded. So that's the way I see sustainability, is just making it useful, and we're trying to demonstrate that across a number of pathogens. So I'll stop there.
Before I move over to the next question, maybe Duncan, do you have any comment on sustainability and based on your experience?
Well, I think the points that were just raised by both Manisha and David are critically important, because I think there's an important reliance on use cases, and I think using those to demonstrate the value of the technology to start creating that initial investment cycle around building capacity. But I think one of the challenges that we have is that a lot of traditional public health models throughout the world are based on usually very narrow context or disease specific verticals. And when you're talking about the implementation of technologies like sequencing, which can be broadly applied, that presents both opportunities and challenges. For one thing, I think a lot of the mindset is really historically has been set along certain disease specific paths. I think the funding also tends to be tied in that way. And so when you're trying to think broadly about how these approaches can be used, you're usually trying to bring together various historically siloed activities, which can sometimes be challenging. In some ways, I think the sequencing itself, there are important logistics challenges. I think there's a lot that can be done by governments, by industry, to try and ensure that these technologies are more broadly available. But I think the sequencing itself is often the more easy problem to solve. It's a question of building capacity. It's a question of making sure that there's access to instrumentation and logistics and supply chain. The difficult piece is again the sustainability, and not necessarily those short-term parts, but often the long-term pieces. How do you build a resilient local capacity that can focus on local priorities, but also contribute to regional and global understanding of these infections? How do you build a sustainable workforce and ensure that the skills that are needed both today and tomorrow are broadly applied and broadly available? And I think those are longer term challenges, because they're not something that you can turn a switch or make an investment and see an immediate result necessarily. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of places where and a lot of potential where some of those initial investments in building that kind of long-term capacity have already shown almost immediate results. But to try and figure out how to translate that into broader applications and ensure long-term sustainability, I think that's going to be one of the key challenges of our time.
One of the other issues that came up in the last panel was in respect to the governance of even as we mark the upload of 100,000 genomes, SARS-CoV-2 genomes, is the governance of surveillance data ecosystems. And, you know, there has been a feeling that sometimes the global south is disadvantaged in terms of utilization of the data that's shared and its accruing benefits. This one I will open up to anyone, but maybe Duncan, you can start off by probably sharing your experience. I figure you got a bit of experience from, I think the US has a federated system, and maybe, because there's been call as well for a federated system for Africa as well. But I'd like to hear your opinion on this. And after Duncan, anyone else who may want to contribute may proceed.
I do think that this is an important challenge, because generating sequence data and interpreting it, applying the necessary bioinformatic analyses to derive meaning from the sequences is really step one in executing an effective public health response. You need a strong data integration from multiple data sources. Increasingly, we're looking at other types of monitoring data, whether that is, you know, things like syndromic surveillance or other classical types of surveillance approaches, or newer, more broadly applied methods like wastewater surveillance, which are increasingly coming out. I think one of the challenges that many countries, many jurisdictions face is how do you actually do that kind of data integration in real time? And that requires not only the necessary agreements to be in place, but also the technical infrastructure, the ability to actually share data between systems. In a system like the United States, this actually is a remarkably hard problem to undertake. We have multiple healthcare systems that exist within each and every state. We have multiple state public health systems, and each one of those is not necessarily, especially in times of crisis, is not necessarily equipped to exchange data in real time or to adapt to changing data needs. I think those are conversations that need to occur. I think that a lot of the data modernization efforts that are currently underway are going to help with that significantly. But in many ways, you know, many countries that are approaching this from a little bit more of a blank sheet of paper, I think there are some important advantages to be able to really think broadly about what sorts of data that we actually need to bring together to effect a response, and how do we actually translate these findings to something meaningful. I think one of the most frustrating things for us on the genomic epidemiology, genomic surveillance side is when you build an elegant sampling system that will pull samples from a variety of different contexts, that will do the analyses in rapid or real time, that will put those data into the hands of decision makers. But in many cases, in many jurisdictions, you know, that's kind of where the speed stops. The implementation, the actually translating those data into meaningful action and meaningful public health interventions often is still lacking. And I think that's something that we need to still figure out. And that's something that's true regardless of context.
Do you want to comment about democratization of data surveillance, surveillance data ecosystems?
Who was that to?
David, do you want to, was to David Blazes, do you want to comment about democratization of data ecosystems?
Do you mean data sharing systems? Sure. Data sharing is obviously challenging. I think we've seen the extreme value of data that's shared. You know, as Tulio mentioned, you know, within a country, within a region, and then globally. I think just data has been a remarkable resource, you know, for many, and I think that there is much more we can do. I think there are federated or multi-parity solutions that, you know, it's not really a technical challenge anymore, but it's a people challenge, and you know, I don't have any magic solution for getting countries to want to transparently share data. It's, as many people mentioned already, there are repercussions. In many ways, countries don't want to discover a new virus, that's unfortunate because there is public health value in identifying and sharing that data so that it may not become a pandemic. But many countries, unfortunately, face economic and political repercussions. So data sharing is I don't have a fully satisfactory answer, I don't think. But yeah, I think there's still a lot of work to do. And technically, again, I think it's solved, but it's more the politics. I'd love to hear my colleagues' thoughts too.
We have just slightly over about 5 minutes to go, so I probably want to opening up to the closing remarks, and probably more to hear what direction for genomic surveillance. What's the future, and what's your role as partners? What do you see yourselves playing? I mean, the next 100,000, after the 100,000 genomes, that SARS-CoV-2, other pathogens, what do you see as the future? So I'll probably, again, go by the same order that we started with, and I'll ask James to start off with the closing remarks.
Yeah, thanks, Joseph. So I think we need to build on the infrastructure that's there. And I think that, the first, and you broke it up into sort of the short and the long term. I think the short is we need to have more capability to be able to define how we look at different infectious diseases and be able to enable people to use the infrastructure that's in place now to be able to start looking at sequencing that. I truly hope that there isn't a celebration of the next 100,000 SARS-CoV-2, but I think that we need to be prepared and have the right assays available. And I think working with the partners at the PGI would help us define what those are and what are the priority lists for that. The other thing that I'll just say very quickly, and I hope it's not too contentious, I do believe that through the pandemic, we haven't done surveillance in the way I define surveillance, and that we've been looking for what we know is there. And I think coming out of the pandemic, what we need to do is take this sequencing capability and do proper surveillance where we're asking the question, what's in our environment, so that we maybe have simpler reagents that cross a broader sort of profile of pathogens that we can detect, so we can have alarms that will alert us that we're seeing one pathogen here or another pathogen here, but using similar types of tests so that the ability to support that from a logistics standpoint is minimized. And I'll stop there.
Vanessa, your closing remarks?
Sure, thank you. I agree. And I think one of the great successes of what's happened so far is really showing that genomics is not just for the elites and for the high income nations, that it's absolutely 100% possible to implement in a wide range of settings. And it's really, genomics is for all. And now that that has been achieved, I think we really need to think, as it relates to pathogen surveillance, how do we do this responsibly? And I mean, use it in a way that's very sustainable and powerful. And so not just throwing it at every single problem that's out there, but really piloting a number of use cases and finding, where does it return a lot of value? Where is it most powerful? Because in doing so, I think we'll find the funding will come and it will be sustained. And we're all going to have to work together to both explore what are the boundaries of those use cases. And I think that will involve some really creative thinking, and then really looking at the sustainability piece so that we keep it going in all of those directions and integrate it into the right health systems to prepare for the future.
Thank you, Vanessa. David?
Sure, and I'll be brief. I think expanding the use cases and defining clearly, looking to public health and providers and scientists in our key countries of interest, helping them to define what questions to pose, and then funding funding those questions, I think is extremely important. I think as Manisha mentioned, philanthropy tends not to be able to support long-term sustainability of routine surveillance. We have to provide that innovative kick that can demonstrate value such that countries see that value and can invest. I think we can better define sampling frames. So I think in many cases, not in Africa, I think, but in many cases around many places around the world, I think we probably have oversampled, and I think we can be more thoughtful about where and when to sample. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Manisha, your closing remarks.
Yeah, I mean, again, not to repeat myself again or others in this case, but the routinization of this work is going to be so critical. And the one nuance I would add to folks who have said this before me is what we need is a sustained demand for these approaches and methodologies, and the ability and a common market that can aggregate that sustained demand and unlock market dynamics. So, with that, we will find an ecosystem that can really support and serve the needs of the continent, both from a supply chain, a technology, and an infrastructure standpoint. But it comes down to defining what those are and how does one ensure that they drive value, and again, a sustained demand, so that we can really ensure this critical infrastructure is maintained not just for current, for ongoing threats, but also emerging and new threats when and if they occur. The second thing I would say is the ability to leverage technology. We have talked about technology in a largely homogeneous manner, but it needs to be right-sized to various contexts. And we look at the continent of Africa and the true diversity of needs that are there. So how can we really identify those archetypes? Look at, and one example that I'd like to share is work that we are doing with Africa CDC and Dr. Happy in looking at automation, miniaturization, to really understand how to optimize the consumables, the reagents, and again, ensure that we are bringing the right technology to the right contexts to serve those use cases. And finally, from our perspective at the Foundation and at the Pandemic Prevention Institute, our ability and our hope to support this broader power of networks, which is the network of scientists that are part of Africa's CDC PGI and Africa CDC as a participant in a broader global network of other sort of regional institutions. And how does one connect efforts, connect learnings, connect the dots, information and insights, such that we know we are as a global community responsive to needs as they emerge and can mobilize not just as countries, but also at the regional level and at the global level. Thank you.
Over to you, Duncan.
Always challenging being the final word. So as I said in my opening comments, and I think has been a thread throughout a lot of the discussions in the panel today, I think we are really on the cusp of a fundamental change in the tools and capabilities in global public health. I think that one of the things that we need to make sure of is that right now we have a galvanized commitment from public health, from the private sector, from academic partners around a common challenge. And I think figuring out how to translate that and not to lose momentum, how to generalize that to other pathogens of public health concern and translate that into routine practice. I think that is one of the challenges before us. How do we translate that long term? I do think that a lot of these sustainability questions, though, really begin at the local level. How do we ensure that that laboratories, that health departments throughout the world have the capabilities that they need, have the expertise that they need to actually not only conduct these types of analyses, to generate these types of data, but also to benefit from the global pool of data that they are contributing to. I think in doing so, you start to solve a lot of the data sharing and equity considerations. You know, a lot of those are very nuanced and complicated, but you can start very easily by starting to level the playing field and ensuring that equal access to the tools and capabilities that we rely on to use the data. And again, you know, I think one of the really exciting things before us is that a lot of these challenges are shared. It doesn't matter if we're talking about countries throughout Africa or Southeast Asia or other parts of the world, or we're talking about California or North Dakota. It still comes down to ensuring that you have appropriate staff, you have access to the necessary technologies, that you have the right mindset and capability to integrate these types of data, to use them effectively and translate them into public health action. And I think those really are shared and universal global health challenges that I think by thinking and working together, we can really make a lot of progress on. So again, congratulations on 100,000 genomes. It's an incredible milestone, but I think it really is, you know, at least in terms of global health, hopefully the beginning.
Thank you very much, panelists, for your insights and, you know, your thoughts into the future. It's been a pleasure having you on this particular panel. You know, you all brought different insights from different perspectives from where you come from, and we also wish to thank other partners who may not be represented on this panel. But before we go away, I'd like to invite my colleague from Africa CDC, Dr. Sarah Mwangi, to make the final closing remarks. Dr. Sarah Mwangi, if you can join us now.
Yes, so thank you very much, Joseph, for inviting me, and thank you very much to the panelists. It's really been a pleasure to listen to you and to contribute to the excellent discussions that we have had in the last 2 hours. I think we all agree that the last year has seen tremendous growth in genomic-informed pathogen surveillance in the African continent, despite the major challenges, some of which we've really turned to opportunities. So we've seen the discussions in the webinar underscoring the importance of genomic surveillance and the technologies in enabling the continent to and the authorities to better respond to public health threats, even in resource-constrained environments. So on behalf of the Africa CDC and the Africa Pathogen Genomics Initiative, I take this opportunity to express our gratitude to the panelists and the organizers who've made this event a success. And a very special thank you to the attendees for taking time out of their busy schedules to attend this webinar. Thank you very much for joining us today. Stay safe and do have a lovely rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Thanks.
Thank you. Congratulations.